The sky above Millfield hung heavy with heat, like the whole town was holding its breath. Inside the Silver Dollar Saloon, laughter died on men's lips, poker chips lay forgotten, and the piano had gone still, every eye fixed forward. A crooked wooden platform stood at the center of the room like an altar to sin, and upon it stood a girl whose innocence was being sold like cattle. Her name was Eleanor Wren, 19, barefoot, wrapped in a sheer white shift that clung to her like a ghost's last touch. Her hands were folded in front of her, not in modesty, but defiance. She would not cry. Not hey, not for them. Silas Crowder, the bloated owner of the saloon, lifted his rusted gavel and grinned. "Gentlemen," he said, voice slick as lard, "what we have here is rarer than gold in these hills. A pure one, untouched, virginal as the spring dew." A coarse laugh erupted from the corner. Someone coughed. Another cleared his throat. The air felt thicker than whiskey. "Let's start the bidding at $50, Crowder announced. "60, a drunk miner called. "75, barked a ranch hand. A pause. Then a sharp, oily voice rang out. 100. Heads turned. Buck Stratham. He leaned against a post near the bar, boot heel hooked casually on the wall. His reputation was older than the town. Meaner, too. They said he beat his horses and branded his women. Now he wanted to own Eleanor, and everyone knew he wouldn't stop bidding. Eleanor's chin didn't falter, but inside her chest, her heart screamed. She'd been orphaned at 16, forced into Crowder's debts through her father's foolish gambling. The only thing she'd had left was her name, and now even that was up for sale. Outside, a man was tying his horse. Dust clung to his sleeves, and sunburn turned his knuckles red. His name was Gideon Rourke, 36, a widower who'd buried his wife 2 winters ago and nearly lost his daughter to fever last fall. He hadn't come for trouble, just medicine, but fate rarely asks permission. As he passed the saloon, a single sound stopped him. Silence, the kind that only forms around something shameful. He stepped through the batwing doors, blinking through smoke. That's when he saw her. She wasn't just beautiful. She was brave. Her spine, though slender, stood straighter than any man's in the room. But her eyes, blue-gray, like stormwater, were drowning. Gideon looked at Crowder. 200. The saloon went dead quiet. Even Buck stood upright. Crowder arched a brow. "We got 200. Do I hear 210? 250, Buck snapped. 300, Gideon said, his voice firm as iron. Buck's hand twitched toward his holster. "You sure about this, farmer?" Crowder warned. "That's 6 months' wages." Gideon nodded. "Paid in full. Now." He dropped a leather pouch on the bar. Silver coins spilled like thunder. "Sold." Crowder slammed the gavel. Gasps scattered. Buck shoved through the crowd. "You just bought yourself a world of trouble." "I didn't buy anything," Gideon said, stepping forward. "I freed someone." He walked to the platform and extended his hand. Eleanor stared at it. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Slowly, she reached out. As her fingers met his, something shifted. Not just in her, not just in him, but in the room. They stepped through the doors into the dust and heat and light. For the first time in days, Eleanor could breathe. Behind them, Buck stared after them, rage licking at the corners of his eyes. The morning after Buck Stratham rode off, the prairie lay washed clean. The earth smelled of rain and wood smoke, and birds dared to sing again. But the quiet, Eleanor would learn, was never just peace. It was often warning. She woke to the smell of frying bread and coffee, rising like a hymn through the cabin walls. For a moment, she let herself pretend that this place was hers, that the nightmare of the auction hadn't happened, that her body still belonged only to her. Then she heard Maisie laugh, a sound as clear as sunlight on water, and she remembered why she was still here. Not for herself. For them. In the kitchen, Gideon stood over the stove, sleeves rolled, hair damp from the well. He moved like a man who didn't need to speak to be heard. His every gesture was quiet protection. Eleanor hovered in the doorway. "You don't have to cook for me." "I cook for the house," he said, not turning. "You're part of it now." That word hit her chest like a breath she didn't know she was holding. Part of it. Not owed. Not owned. Not even saved. Just included. She took a seat beside Maisie, who offered a toothy grin. "Papa says I can teach you to play dominoes." Eleanor smiled softly. "I've never learned." "That's okay," Maisie said. "We've got time." They shared breakfast in the way that only small families do, slowly, warmly, with the kind of silence that wraps itself around you like a blanket. But outside, in the hills, Buck wasn't forgetting. And neither was Silas Crowder. By mid-afternoon, news had traveled faster than hooves. At the general store in Millfield, gossip bloomed like wildfire. "You hear Rock bought the saloon girl. They say she was barefoot. Buck says she belongs to Crowder. Claims Rock stole her. Sheriff won't touch it. Says it was legal bidding." But legality never stopped men like Crowder. Or Buck. In his office above the saloon, Silas lit a cigar and blew smoke at a ledger. His eyes narrowed like a snake in brush. "She was mine," he said to no one. "And he took her." Beside him, Buck leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Rourke embarrassed me. Made me look weak. We can't let that stand." Silas drummed his fingers on the desk. "You want revenge. I want my due." Silas nodded slowly. "Then we take what's his." Back at the cabin, Eleanor stood in the garden with Maisie, teaching her how to pinch herbs between her fingers to release their scent. "Lavender's for calming," she said. "Chamomile for sleep." "You know a lot," Maisie said, eyes wide. "I used to dream of being an apothecary," Eleanor whispered. "Why didn't you?" "My father gambled away everything. The dream went with it." Maisie plucked a sprig of mint and offered it. "Maybe it's time to dream again." Eleanor took it, blinking back tears. "Maybe it is." That night, Gideon sat by the fire, repairing a broken bootlace. Eleanor curled up with a book, Maisie asleep upstairs. The quiet stretched between them like thread, not tense, not forced, just shared. "Crowder won't let this go," she said finally. "I know. They'll come again. I know that too. You don't regret it." He looked up. "Regret saving you?" She nodded. Gideon paused, then set the boot aside. "I buried my wife 3 winters ago. I'd give anything to see her safe again. I couldn't do that for her. But I could do it for you." Eleanor looked down, breath catching in her throat. "That's not something I know how to deserve." "You don't have to." Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. But a promise of something gentler. Something slower than the world allowed. She rose to check the windows. The night outside was too quiet. "Storm's coming," she said softly. Gideon nodded. "Let it." The following days were borrowed time. The sun rose too bright. The wind blew too still. The silence in the hills felt less like peace and more like breath held tight. Eleanor awoke before dawn to find Gideon already at work. He moved through the morning like a shadow, preparing more than just the farm. Oil lamp checked, ropes coiled, rifle polished and resting beside the door. He never said the word siege, but the cabin whispered it in the way its walls stiffened with anticipation. Maisie, ever cheerful, chased chickens in the yard. Eleanor tried to smile at her joy, but her eyes never left the tree line. She knew now, kindness had a cost, and the bill was coming due. Mid-morning, a rider came up fast. Young Micah Harper from town, panting and pale. "Sheriff's gone," he shouted before dismounting. "Crowder's filed charges in Junction. Said Rock kidnapped her. Judge is coming with deputies. Might even deputize Buck and his men to bring you in." Gideon's jaw tightened. How long? Maybe a day. Maybe less. They are armed, Mr. Rourke. Real armed. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. They'll take me. They'll try. Gideon turned to the boy. Tell Jonas. Tell him everything. If the town still has a spine, it'll show now. Micah nodded, fear and fire in his eyes, then rode off. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She walked the edge of the garden, the moon silvering her skin like armor. Every creak in the wood, every owl's cry, scraped her nerves raw. Inside, Maisie dreamed of rivers and candy. But Eleanor dreamed of the auction block. She turned when she heard soft footsteps behind her. You should rest, Gideon said. I can't. They stood together under the moonlight, the prairie stretching out around them like a held breath. I used to think the worst pain, she said, was being sold. Gideon waited. But it's not. It's being free and still afraid. You're not alone anymore. That's the part one don't know what to do with. He took her hand, rough calluses brushing against bruised fingers. Not romantic. Not yet. But strong. Tomorrow, he said, we stand. They woke to the sound of hooves. Not one. Many. Eleanor dressed quickly, heart pounding. Maisie clung to her side. Gideon stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Dust rose in the distance. And then, they appeared. A small army. Buck Stratham at the front, smirking beneath his black hat. Beside him, a mustached man with a badge, the junction deputy. Gideon Rock, the man called. You are hereby ordered to surrender the girl known as Eleanor Wren into custody, pending charges of theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Gideon didn't move. She's not property, he said. And there's no conspiracy but the one that put her on a stage like livestock. Buck chuckled. You gonna shoot your way through the law now? But then came a sound they didn't expect. More hooves, coming from behind. From the Ridge Road Sheriff Jonas, Reverend Mills, Harold Chen, Doc Whitman, and townspeople. Not all armed, but enough. Jonas raised his voice. This girl was sold against her will. She's no criminal. She's a victim. The deputy blinked. This ain't your jurisdiction. Maybe not, Jonas said. But it's my town. And she's under our protection. The two groups faced off. 10 against 10. The line of justice drawn in prairie dust. Gideon's voice cut through the wind. You want her. You'll have to shoot through me. And you better be sure, because if one bullet flies, it won't end here. The deputy hesitated. Buck scowled. And Eleanor stepped forward. No more hiding, she said. Her voice was steady. You want testimony? You'll get it. Crowder forged debts. Sold girls. Kept 2 dead women's names on his books. I saw it all. Gasps rippled behind the badge. Crowder's name wasn't supposed to be spoken. I'll testify, she said, eyes locked on the deputy. But only if you guarantee my safety. Not in some jail. Here. In this town. The man looked at her, then at the crowd behind her. He made his decision. I'll be back, he said. With a judge. And they turned. Buck fumed. But they left. Later, as the prairie wind eased, Eleanor sat with Maisie beneath the willow tree by the creek. You were so brave, Maisie said. No, Eleanor whispered. I was just tired of running. Gideon joined them, carrying tea and peace. What now? She asked. Now you write, he said. Now you live. And for the first time, she believed it might be possible. They didn't wait long. By the second sunrise, the judge arrived. But so did Crowder. He swaggered into town with documents in hand and venom on his tongue. Behind him rode 3 hired guns, city-slick mercenaries with cold eyes and twitchy fingers. Gideon watched from the porch, rifle in hand, as Crowder dismounted like he owned the dirt. Judge Langston, he boomed. You'll see the girl's nothing but a liar. I've got records. Signed debts. Witnesses. She sold herself to pay her father's losses. That's not a crime. That's a contract. Eleanor stood beside Jonas, fists clenched at her sides. She was 16. Jonas growled. Orphaned. Threatened. That's coercion, not consent. Langston looked tired. He leafed through Crowder's papers, then Eleanor's affidavit. His gray eyes scanned both sides. There'll be a hearing. Proper testimony. Until then, the girl stays here. Under protection. Crowder spat. Then I want her confined. You'll get what the law says. Not a thread more. That night, fires burned lower. But not out. Crowder paced the edge of the town like a fox denied the henhouse. Eleanor watched from the attic, Maisie asleep beside her. Her heart beat in triplets, heavy and anxious. They'll come for me, she whispered into the dark. Gideon's voice came back, steady. Then we'll be ready. The prairie sky darkened like a lid shutting tight. No moon, no stars, just a heavy stillness clinging to the town of Millfield as if it, too, held its breath. Inside the attic of the rock farmhouse, Eleanor sat cross-legged on the wooden floor. A single lantern flickered between her and Gideon, casting their shadows like whispers against the walls. Below, Maisie had finally drifted into a deep sleep, curled beneath quilts stitched with her late mother's hands. Eleanor broke the silence first. Do you believe in justice? Gideon didn't answer right away. He ran his hand through his hair, the oil-stained fingers betraying the day's toil. I believe in trying. That's not the same. It's all I have. Eleanor exhaled. Tomorrow, I'll stand before a judge who knows Crowder by name, who's seen men like Buck donate to churches and shoot women behind barns. I'll be asked to recall every shame, every bruise, every word spoken to strip me down to less than human. You won't be alone. She looked up, eyes shining. But I'll still be alone. In my skin. In my memories. A long silence passed between them before Gideon spoke again. You know what struck me the most? That first day. She waited. That you didn't flinch. Her brow furrowed. When I stepped forward. When I said, she's coming home with me. You didn't beg. You didn't cry. You just looked me in the eye, like someone who already knew how to survive. Her lips trembled. I'd already survived too much to believe it was over. And still, you came with me. She didn't respond. Instead, she leaned back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. The lantern hissed gently, the flame swaying in the draft. Do you think, she asked softly, that men like Crowder know they are evil? Gideon considered. I think they've been rewarded so long for their sins that they've confused cruelty for righteousness. They think possession is love, that power is respect. And we suppose to ask them for protection. No, his voice sharpened. That's why tomorrow matters. Outside, an owl hooted, low and mournful. A branch scraped the roof. The town lay quiet, but not asleep. Across town, Crowder wasn't sleeping either. In the back room of the shuttered saloon, he slammed a ledger shut, sending dust into the air. The fire in the hearth danced like his thoughts, flickering, restless, feeding off past glories. They think a farmer and a whore are going to ruin me, he sneered. The city men he'd hired, Danton, Cray, and Lyle, sat around the table, bored but ready. Danton, the oldest, cleaned his revolver with a silk cloth. You want her silenced. You say the word. I want her discredited, Crowder growled. Judge Langston won't rule against me unless he has cause. Cray grinned, gold tooth gleaming. Cause is easy. Make her look unstable, emotional, vengeful. Crowder's smile was slick with cruelty, and if she slips away before the hearing, all the better. Back at the farm, Gideon checked the locks a second time. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked out into the darkness that spread like spilled ink across the fields. Do you miss her? She asked. He didn't need to ask who. Every day. She turned. You never talk about your wife. He shrugged. Not much to say that doesn't ache. I'd like to know, she said. If that's all right. He nodded, eyes drifting toward the empty barn. Her name was Ruth. She laughed too loud in church, danced barefoot when it rained, died in her sleep the winter Maisie turned 5. No warning. Just quiet. Eleanor's throat caught. She sounds like someone who stayed. She was. They stood there a moment longer, two people with different wounds but matching silences. The wind blew, curling around them like a question neither wanted to answer. Eleanor spoke again, barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'll ever be whole. Then be honest, he said. Not whole. Just real. Morning would come like a trial. But that night, in the hush before the storm, Gideon laid a second blanket on the attic floor. Eleanor didn't protest. She slept lightly, dreamlessly, because when justice is near, memory becomes a battlefield, and hearts beat louder than guns. The courthouse in Millfield had never seen a crowd like this. Even the floorboards seemed unsure of the weight they held. Farmers and widows, ranch hands and seamstresses, all shoulder to shoulder, faces strained with something close to reckoning. The air inside the small wooden room was a blend of old perfume, dust, and tightly packed breath. Eleanor stood in the center of it all. Judge Langston presided from a bench that looked older than the territory. His spectacles hung low on his nose as he sifted through papers. Sheriff Jonas stood at Eleanor's side like a pillar carved from stone, while Gideon leaned against the wall near the door, arms crossed, a presence both quiet and volcanic. Crowder lounged at the defense table, legs crossed, lips twisted in mockery. Buck Stratham, seated behind him, gnawed on a toothpick, as if barred by the legalities of consequence. Then the judge called her name. Eleanor stepped forward, and the room, impossibly, grew stiller. You may begin, Langston said. She swallowed hard, but her voice didn't tremble. Not today. My name is Eleanor Wren. I'm 19. A year ago, I worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Junction. I didn't work there by choice. Crowder laughed, low and mocking. Oh, you poor thing. Silence, Langston said, without looking up. Eleanor continued. My father died when I was 15. We owed debts, not large, but enough for men like Crowder to smell blood. One evening, he offered me a deal. Work the bar to pay off the debt. I agreed, but the bar wasn't what he meant. The murmurs began then, quiet, uneasy. Eleanor's hands clenched. He locked me in a back room. Said my debt was too big now. Said there was a different kind of work I'd be doing. That night, I was auctioned to the highest bidder. The crowd shifted, a ripple of discomfort and disbelief. I was told if I ran, he'd say I stole from him. He had signed documents, forged, said he'd show them to the sheriff, make sure I ended up in jail, or worse. And no one questioned it, because I was just a girl without a family. Langston looked at her then. Why come forward now? Eleanor's gaze found Gideon. Because someone treated me like I was worth saving. And I remembered that I still had a name, that I wasn't born for shame. Another hush. Not silence, reverence. Langston turned toward Crowder. You claim to have contracts. Crowder smirked, pulling out a folder. Signed by her, dated. It's all there. She agreed to the terms. Work, payment, lodging. I gave her shelter, food. Langston flipped through the pages, then passed them to Eleanor. Do you deny signing these? She stared at them. I signed what I was told were inventory logs. Receipts. I was 17. I didn't know better. And if you check the handwriting closely, the dates were altered. Added later. Judge Langston adjusted his spectacles, eyes narrowing. You say she was underage. Is there documentation? Jonas stepped forward, handing over a worn leather-bound Bible. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a birth record. She was born in July, Jonas said. She turned 18 2 months ago. Langston read the page, then stared down at Crowder. And you began these employment contracts when she was 17. Crowder leaned back. Girls lie. She looked old enough. You just admitted to exploiting a minor, Jonas growled. Langston raised a hand. I'll decide what was admitted. The judge rose slowly. We'll recess for 1 hour. I need to review these documents. But I'll say this. He looked at Eleanor, then at Crowder. When we return, the court will consider not only whether this girl was exploited, but whether Mr. Crowder committed fraud, coercion, and criminal confinement. Crowder's grin cracked. Outside, the crowd spilled onto Main Street, the noon sun no warmer than the tension in the air. Eleanor stood alone for a moment, hands pressed to her chest. Her heart beat fast, but not with fear, with the sensation of her past unclenching. Gideon joined her silently. You were brave in there, he said. No. I was angry. He nodded. That's a start. She turned toward him. Do you think they'll believe me? I think they already do. The rest is just paperwork. And somewhere deep in town, a noose swayed gently on an empty gallows, unused for years, but not forgotten. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and colorless. The town gathered in knee silence. No vendors, no dogs barking, no children playing. Just the heavy steps of townsfolk filing into the makeshift courthouse, the old mercantile, cleared out and lined with benches. Sunlight barely filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Eleanor sat at the front, flanked by Sheriff Jonas on one side and Doc Whitman on the other. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Across the room, Crowder leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, a smug grin plastered across his face. His men hovered near the back wall, still, silent, dangerous. Judge Langston entered, and the room stood. His robes were dusty from the road, his expression unreadable. He took his seat with a sigh that sounded heavier than it should have. We are gathered today, he began, to determine the truth in the matter of Eleanor Wren versus Silas Crowder, a case alleging coercion, unlawful debt contracts, and forced auction of a minor. Gasps flickered through the room. Even hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real. Langston turned to Eleanor. Miss Wren, you may begin your statement. She stood, and the silence deepened. When I was 16, she began, voice trembling, my father died in the mines. He left behind debts, not his fault. The company cut wages, and we barely ate. Crowder offered to take care of it. All I had to do, he said, was sign some papers. Her voice grew steadier. I was a child. Alone. I trusted him. I thought I'd be serving drinks or sweeping floors. But that wasn't what he meant. Crowder scoffed. You knew exactly what you signed. Eleanor didn't look at him. I knew exactly what it felt like. To be locked in a room. To hear men shouting bids outside. To have no name, just a price tag. A tremor passed through the room. Someone stifled a sob. I escaped, she continued, and I've been running ever since. But I'm done running. I'm here now. And so is the truth. Langston nodded solemnly. Thank you. Then he turned to Crowder. Mr. Crowder, do you have your documentation? Crowder rose, smiling like a man with nothing to fear. He handed over papers, contracts, ledgers, payment logs. All signed. All dated. These, he said, prove she entered a lawful agreement. Debt repayment in exchange for room, board, and employment. There's nothing illegal in them. Langston frowned. These signatures, they are different. The dates are altered. Crowder shrugged. Old ink. Shaky hands. Nothing suspicious. Then came the voice no one expected. May I speak? Gideon Rock had risen from the benches, standing tall and steady. Langston hesitated. You are not sworn. But I have evidence, Gideon said. Real evidence. Taken from the safe in Crowder's saloon, before it was cleared out. Ledgers, lists, and names. He stepped forward, placing a worn leather book on the judge's table. Langston opened it, and froze. His eyes scanned line after line. Girls' names, ages, auction prices, payout logs, and beside one entry, E. Wren, 16, unpaid debt, hold for Morrison. The courtroom exhaled as one. This, Langston said, voice tight, is not just criminal. It's monstrous. Crowder went pale. I move, Langston declared, that Silas Crowder be held in custody pending trial for trafficking, coercion, and falsification of legal documents. Further, all outstanding debts under his name are to be considered null and void until the court reviews every claim. Sheriff Jonas rose before the gavel could fall. With your permission, Judge. Langston nodded. Jonas marched to Crowder, clapped iron cuffs on his wrists, and read him his rights aloud for everyone to hear. Crowder thrashed. This ain't over. You don't understand what you doing. I've got friends in Junction, in Carson. You had friends he too, Jonas said coldly. Not anymore. As the crowd broke into murmurs, Eleanor sat down slowly. Her hands still trembled, but not from fear. Not anymore. Gideon reached her side and offered his hand, not as a savior, but as something else. Something solid. I told you, he whispered. You weren't alone. She looked at him, and nodded. The night after the hearing was colder than the prairie had any right to be. Wind pressed against the shutters like an uninvited ghost. Inside Gideon's cabin, Eleanor sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, staring into the flame of a single lamp. It flickered in rhythm with her thoughts. Too fast, too brittle. Every time the floor creaked or a coyote cried in the distance, her breath hitched. I can't keep living like this, she whispered to the room. I can't keep waiting for someone else to own my life. Gideon stood at the doorway, watching her, not intruding, just near enough for her to know he'd be there if the shadows got too loud. You're not owned, he said gently. Not anymore. She shook her head. You can't know what it's like. To always be a debt. A contract. A girl in someone else's pocket. He stepped forward. No. But I know what it's like to lose something precious and have no way to fix it. I know what it's like to be too late. She looked up at him. What did you lose? Gideon's gaze dropped. My wife. Fever took her before I could ride for the doctor. I was chasing cattle thieves and came home to silence. Ever since, I've been trying to build something that won't leave. Eleanor said nothing for a moment. Then, you did. You built me a place to come back to. The words were so quiet they barely reached him. But when they did, they rooted deep. That night, neither of them slept. The fire started just past midnight. Maisie's scream jolted them from their half-sleep. Through the window, they saw the orchard lit in flickering orange. Flames licked the branches like hungry tongues, and smoke curled into the moonlit sky. Gideon was out the door before Eleanor could blink, shouting commands, grabbing buckets, urging the horses from the barn. Eleanor wrapped Maisie in a shawl and ran out after him, the heat already tightening her skin. Back porch! Gideon roared. Keep the little one safe. But Eleanor didn't stop at the porch. She grabbed a bucket and joined him at the tree line, both of them drenched in sweat and ash within minutes. They passed water between them in a rhythm older than words. The fire snapped like gunfire. Sparks flew into the dark like curses. And above it all, a laugh echoed. Crowder. He stood on the rise, flanked by two of his men. No torches in hand. Just that smirk. Bit of a shame, all those apples. He drawled. Should have kept better watch. Rourke. Gideon surged forward, but Eleanor grabbed his arm. Not now, she hissed. He wants that. Let him see you don't break. The fire took 5 trees before they smothered it. But it didn't take the house. It didn't take the barn. And it didn't take their resolve. The next morning, Langston issued a formal warning. Any further provocation from Crowder or his men would lead to an immediate trial. But Crowder was too clever to strike again so openly. Instead, he poisoned the air. He whispered to townsfolk. He paid for drinks. He slipped coins into the hands of young men with empty bellies and looser morals. Rumors grew like mold. That Eleanor was a liar. That Gideon had forged the ledgers. That maybe the girl wanted to be sold after all. It wasn't just the orchard that burned. It was trust. Eleanor saw it in the eyes of the townspeople. Their hesitation. Their shrinking glances. "Don't let it rot you," Doc Whitman warned her. "Rumor is fast. But truth's a patient animal." Still, it wore on her. The next time she walked into Harold Chen's shop for flour, he didn't look her in the eyes. The price was higher than last week. Gideon noticed. "You don't have to keep fighting this," he told her one night as they cleaned soot off the porch. "You've done more than anyone ever expected." Eleanor looked out at the prairie, her eyes hard and shining. "If I stop now, he wins. And if I let him win, every girl like me stays in the dark." Gideon swallowed, then reached for her hand. This time, she didn't flinch. Their fingers laced like roots in fire-scorched soil. "Then we stand," he said again. "And we speak," she replied. That evening, Eleanor sat at the table, ink-stained and red-eyed, writing her statement in full, every name, every account, every secret she'd buried beneath survival. And as the lamp burned low, she felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not rage. Something quieter, something like power. The town didn't sleep. Even under a sky stitched with stars, Millfield stayed restless, waiting for something to crack. A gunshot, a scream, the whimper of justice failing again. Gideon Rourke sat outside the cabin, his rifle across his lap, eyes on the tree line. Eleanor sat inside by the window, arms wrapped around her knees, watching embers breathe low in the hearth. She hadn't spoken much since the judge's visit. Not from fear, not from doubt. She was conserving something deeper than words, a strength built from all that hadn't killed her. By the barn, Sheriff Jonas kept vigil with Harold Chen and Doc Whitman. Reverend Mills walked the perimeter like prayer in motion. No one trusted that Crowder would honor due process. He'd made too much money off the broken, the voiceless, and he wasn't the type to surrender that power without blood. And still, morning came. But it was not morning that broke them. It was a single shot. Then two more, muffled cracks, sharp and final. Gideon moved first, already in motion by the time Eleanor reached the door. In the dawn hush, three figures lay still in the grass by Crowder's wagon. The mercenaries, all dead. Jonas approached slow, weapon drawn. Then a fourth figure staggered forward. Crowder. Blood oozed from his side, but his eyes were wild, feral with desperation. "They turned on me," he gasped. "Tried to rob me." He collapsed in the dirt. Doc Whitman rushed forward, but it was no use. Crowder's hands twitched, then stilled. His empire, of forged ledgers, sold girls, and men bought with silence, crumbled like dust in prairie wind. Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, watching the light touch the fields, and wondered if freedom always arrived this quiet. By midday, Judge Langston signed the order, case dismissed. With the chief accuser dead and no legal ground to hold Eleanor, the law, for once, bowed to what was right. Crowder's saloon was shuttered, his record seized. The town, once complicit in silence, turned over its shame like soil long overdue for planting. Eleanor gave her testimony in writing, and the judge promised to forward it to territorial authorities. "It's not over," Langston warned. "Others like Crowder, they don't vanish with one man." "I know," Eleanor replied, voice even. "But I'm not vanishing either." 3 weeks later, under a sky the color of cotton, Eleanor planted her first seed at the Rourke farm. She pressed it deep into the soil with bare fingers. No gloves. No hesitation. Just earth and skin and a life not taken, finally allowed to grow. Maisie bounced at her side, waving a watering can and naming each row as if they were old friends. "This one's Rosie," she said, pointing at a sprouting bean. "And that one's Tallulah." Eleanor laughed, and the sound caught her by surprise, rich and unguarded. She'd forgotten how her laughter sounded when it wasn't armored. Gideon looked up from the fence he was mending. His hands were always busy now, not from worry, but from building, fixing, growing. "Think she'll name the corn too?" he asked. "She'll name the whole field if you let her." They smiled at each other across rows of new life. That evening, as the sun pooled gold across the porch, Eleanor stood at the edge of the yard. The wind curled around her legs, warm and easy, and in it she heard the echoes of the girl she'd been, the girl in the white dress, trembling on a stage. She wasn't that girl anymore, not because the fear was gone, but because she'd walked through it and kept going. Gideon stepped up behind her, quiet as always. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," she said. "I'm thinking of staying. But this time, by choice." "Then it's home." Eleanor turned to him. "Gideon, why did you really save me?" He didn't rush the answer. He never did. "Because someone needed to," he said simply. "And because I couldn't bear for my daughter to grow up in a world where no one would." She looked toward the window, where Maisie drew pictures in candlelight, tongue sticking out in concentration. "She's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her." Eleanor's voice softened. "And me." He met her eyes. "You. I don't know what I did to deserve." The moment held. No grand declarations. Just the kind that grow between hard days and shared silence. Real. Human. Home. Epilogue. Years later, travelers passing through Millfield sometimes ask about the little white farmhouse at the edge of the prairie. They hear about the widower and the auction girl, about the day a town chose courage over comfort, and they always ask the same question. Was it real? No one ever answers quite the same. Some say it was a love story. Some call it justice. Some say it was nothing but prairie wind and chance. But in the farmhouse, just beyond the willow tree, a woman tends a garden. And in her eyes is the truth. She was auctioned, but she was never sold. She was nearly lost. But now, she is home.